I used to believe that hard work and loyalty could protect you. That if you gave everything to your job, if you stayed late, smiled through the stress, and hit every deadline, the company would have your back. I was wrong. Loyalty only matters until the truth becomes inconvenient. 6 years. That's how long I worked there. 6 years of building trust, mentoring juniors, keeping secrets, and defending decisions I didn't even agree with because I thought that's what good employees did. I was proud of my work, until the day I found something I wasn't supposed to see. It was a spreadsheet, hidden in a folder marked internal audits. It looked ordinary at first, but a few numbers stood out. Payments that didn't match project codes. Vendors that didn't exist. And one signature, my manager's, appearing on approvals that had nothing to do with our department. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. I thought I was doing the right thing when I reported it. I sent a quiet email to my manager, asking for clarification. He thanked me for catching it, said he'd take care of it, and told me to delete the file. I did. But that was the moment my world started to shrink. The next morning, my access to certain folders was temporarily restricted. A few days later, I was left out of a meeting I'd organized. Then, during our weekly update, my manager publicly questioned my recent performance. The looks from my colleagues were sharp, curious, almost pitying. I didn't understand what was happening, yet. The shift was subtle but brutal. People I'd worked beside for years started acting like strangers. My friend in HR stopped returning my calls. A senior executive who used to greet me every morning suddenly couldn't remember my name. The office walls began to feel colder, the fluorescent lights harsher, like I was standing in the spotlight of my own interrogation. Then came the call. HR wanted to check in. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. They mentioned concerns about my behavior. Some team members have felt uncomfortable, they said. Maybe it would be best if you took some time off. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order wrapped in politeness. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. My entire career, everything I had built, was suddenly unstable. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was whisper to myself, what did I do wrong? That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone left. I walked through the cubicles, touching the back of the chair I'd sat in for years, the coffee mug I'd left behind that morning, the photos pinned to my wall. I wasn't just losing a job, I was losing a piece of my identity. The fear crept in quietly. What if they were right? What if they could twist the story, make me the problem? I replayed every conversation in my head, every small mistake I might have made, searching for something they could use against me. That's when the paranoia started. Emails went unanswered. My badge stopped working on certain floors. Even the janitor, someone I'd chatted with every evening, avoided my eyes. The company I had given everything to was slowly erasing me. I could feel it. One afternoon, I tried to log into the internal portal, but my password had been reset. IT said it was a routine update. When I asked my manager, he told me I was being reassigned. No details. No explanation. Just a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. I realized then, it wasn't incompetence. It was a message. I wasn't supposed to ask questions. I was supposed to disappear quietly. But silence is a strange thing. At first, it feels safe. Then it starts to eat away at you. Every unanswered email becomes an accusation. Every fake smile, a threat. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started writing everything down, every conversation, every glance, every file name. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. One evening, as I packed my things, I caught a reflection of myself in the dark office window. Tired eyes, trembling hands, but a spark of something else too. Anger. I realized they wanted me to break, to crumble under the pressure so they wouldn't have to push me out. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. That night, I promised myself something. I wasn't going to let them bury me. Not without a fight. If they wanted silence, they were about to hear my voice louder than ever. And that was the moment everything changed. The silence didn't last long, it evolved. What started as subtle exclusion became something colder, sharper. My desk was moved temporarily to the far end of the office, right beside the printer, as if I'd suddenly been demoted to background noise. My projects were reassigned. My name was quietly removed from documents I'd authored. It was as if I was being erased from the company's memory, one spreadsheet at a time. I remember walking into a meeting I'd scheduled weeks earlier. Everyone went silent. The projector was already on, slides I hadn't seen before glowing across the wall. My manager looked up, startled. "Oh," he said, "I thought you got the memo. We decided to pivot." My work, months of it, was gone. Rebranded. Claimed by someone else. That night, I sat in my car for an hour before driving home. I didn't cry. I just stared at the dashboard, trying to understand how people could switch from friendly smiles to calculated cruelty so fast. I'd read about corporate retaliation, but I never thought I'd be the target of it. Then came the first email from legal. A warning about confidential material. They implied I might have mishandled sensitive data, an accusation with no evidence. It was meant to scare me, and it did. Every message, every login, every click suddenly felt dangerous. I started double-checking everything, terrified that even breathing wrong could be used against me. My work friends, those I thought I could trust, began to disappear. "Sorry, can't get involved," one text read. Another coworker blocked me entirely. I used to have lunch with a group by the windows. Now, every time I walked by, the conversation would stop. I'd hear the clink of forks, the shifting of chairs, the quiet discomfort of people pretending I wasn't there. At home, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every small interaction. Was it my fault? Did I make them uncomfortable? Was I the villain in their story now? I started avoiding my phone, afraid of more HR messages or another confidentiality reminder. Even my email notifications made me flinch. Then the whispers began. In the hallway, I overheard someone mention that compliance issue. Another time, someone said, "She's being investigated." Lies travel fast in corporate hallways, especially when they're convenient. And I knew exactly who had started them. The isolation was complete. I'd arrive early, sit through the day in silence, then leave after dark so no one would see me. It was like existing in a ghost version of my own life, present, but invisible. I could feel the walls closing in, the air heavier every morning I walked through those glass doors. One Friday, HR called me into a small conference room. 2 people were waiting, my HR representative and a lawyer I'd never met. They smiled like they were meeting an old friend. The conversation started polite, almost casual. But the questions, they weren't casual at all. They asked if I'd spoken to anyone about internal matters. They asked if I'd accessed any restricted files. They asked if I intended to remain with the company. Every question was a trap, lined with a smile. When it ended, I walked out numb. My hands shook as I held the door open. I realized then, they weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to make me quit. They wanted me to give up so they could say I left voluntarily. That weekend, I couldn't bring myself to open my laptop. The thought of checking work emails made me nauseous. I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the echo of my own thoughts. I'd never felt so alone. But sometimes, isolation has a strange effect. It strips away everything that's fake. Without the noise of co-workers and deadlines, I started to see things clearly. This wasn't just office politics. It was a cover-up. And I was standing in the way. They wanted me scared. They wanted me to disappear. But I was done being quiet. Somewhere inside the fear, I felt something else rising, anger, sharp and alive. I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself one thing, I would find a way to fight back. Because if they wanted me gone, they were going to regret ever trying to erase me. It's strange how quickly fear can turn into focus. After weeks of sleepless nights, something inside me just snapped. I stopped waiting for things to get better. I stopped expecting anyone to save me. I realized that if I wanted justice, I'd have to create it myself. It started small. I began writing down everything that had happened, every meeting, every email, every whisper I could remember. I filled pages with notes, times, names, details. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. They weren't reacting randomly, they were covering up something deliberate. One night, I stayed late, pretending to finish paperwork. When the office emptied out, I opened an old shared drive that hadn't been updated in months. I searched through archived folders, project logs, payment requests. Buried deep inside one of the backups, I found a document that shouldn't have been there. It referenced a vendor I'd never heard of, tied to invoices that were signed off by the regional director himself. My hands shook as I scrolled. There it was, the same pattern I'd seen before. Duplicate charges, inflated costs, and a trail leading straight to the top. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was fraud. And suddenly, I understood why they wanted me gone. I copied the file onto a USB drive and hid it in my bag. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself think. Every step toward the exit felt like walking through an invisible minefield. If security stopped me, if someone asked what I was doing, I knew it could all end right there. But no one did. I walked out of the building that night with the truth sitting quietly in my purse. At home, I locked my door and stared at the screen for hours. The evidence was right there in front of me. But what could I do with it? Go to the police. They'd call it a corporate matter. Go to HR. They were part of the problem. I felt trapped, holding dynamite without a match. Then I remembered a journalist I'd met 2 years earlier at a tech conference. She'd done an expose on whistleblowers and corporate cover-ups. Her name was Emma. I still had her card. The next morning, I sent her a simple message: "I think I have something you'll want to see." My hands trembled as I hit send. She replied in less than an hour. "Meet me," she wrote, "and bring everything." That evening, we met at a small cafe downtown. I recognized her immediately. Sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of person who could see straight through you. I handed her the USB drive and told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "You're not paranoid. You're right." Hearing those words was like breathing again for the first time in months. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. There really was a reason they'd tried to erase me. But Emma didn't rush to publish. She told me to be careful, to make sure I had a plan. "Once this goes out," she said, "they'll come for you harder than ever. You need to be ready." That night, I barely slept, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. I started preparing quietly, backing up files, storing copies in cloud drives under fake names, using encrypted apps to message Emma. Every small step felt like reclaiming a piece of power they'd stolen from me. Days passed, then weeks. I went to work pretending everything was normal, nodding politely in meetings, smiling at people who'd stabbed me in the back. But underneath that mask, I was watching, waiting, recording. Every lie they told became another piece of the story I was building. And then, one morning, Emma sent me a message: "It's time." Attached was a draft headline. Just reading it made my pulse quicken: "Regional Director accused of corporate fraud by insider source." It wasn't published yet, but it would be soon. My entire life was about to change, one way or another. I stared at my computer screen, my reflection faint in the black glass. I wasn't scared anymore. I'd spent too long being silent. Now, the truth was louder than their threats. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. They thought they had buried me, but all they'd really done was plant the seed of their own downfall. When I woke up the next morning, the world felt different. The air was heavy with the weight of what was coming. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a threat. And the company. They could sense it. Emma and I had decided on a careful plan. We wouldn't publish everything at once. We'd release information in waves, small enough to avoid suspicion but powerful enough to make ripples. Every document I'd saved, every screenshot, every memo would become part of a story too large to ignore. But before that could happen, I needed to protect myself. I wiped my work laptop, backed up my personal files, and disabled location sharing on every device. I switched to encrypted messaging, changed my passwords, and even started taking a different route home from work. It felt paranoid, but necessary. Because I knew, once the first story dropped, the company wouldn't just sit quietly. For a few days, I lived two lives. By day, I was still the calm, polite employee trying to rebuild trust. By night, I was coordinating with Emma, reviewing drafts, checking sources, building a timeline that connected every fraudulent invoice, every hush-hush payment, every lie. The closer we got, the more dangerous it became. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from IT. They said they needed to verify my credentials and asked me to bring my laptop to their office. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a random check, they were on to me. I stalled, claiming I was in a client meeting, and texted Emma immediately. Her reply came fast. "Get out. Now." I left the building with my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I didn't even go home, I went straight to a co-working cafe across town. I sat in the corner, opened my phone, and watched as my company email account was disabled in real time. They were trying to cut me off. That was the moment I knew the clock had started ticking. Over the next 48 hours, Emma and her editor verified every document I'd provided. The evidence was solid: fraudulent accounts, fake vendors, and company funds funneling through shell corporations linked to the director. We had it all. The story wasn't just going to hurt them, it was going to expose everything. The night before publication, I barely slept. My hands kept shaking as I scrolled through the final article draft. My name wasn't mentioned, Emma made sure of that, but the details were unmistakable. Anyone inside the company would know exactly who had blown the whistle. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, waiting for my phone to buzz, for the world to change. And then it did. At 8:04 a.m., the article went live. Within minutes, the company's name started trending. The comments flooded in: outrage, disbelief, anger. People demanded answers. The board issued a statement within hours, calling the allegations false and malicious. But the documents spoke for themselves. Screenshots of the evidence spread online like wildfire. By noon, journalists from other outlets were reaching out for comment. By evening, the company had gone into full damage control. Emergency meetings were called. Executives cancelled public appearances. Internal memos leaked, showing panic behind closed doors. And me. I watched it all unfold from my small apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor with my laptop open. It was surreal. The company that had tried to erase me was now drowning under the weight of its own lies. But the victory wasn't clean. I started getting strange calls from blocked numbers. My landlord told me someone had asked questions about my lease. A car I didn't recognize parked across the street for 3 nights in a row. Fear came rushing back, sharp and heavy. But this time, it didn't control me. I refused to back down. Emma's team connected me with a lawyer, someone experienced in whistleblower protection. We filed for safeguards and built a digital trail showing how the company had tried to intimidate me. Every message, every letter, every HR meeting became part of the evidence. When the regional director finally resigned for personal reasons, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted accountability. I wanted the world to see what happens when power tries to bury the truth. And so, I sent one final message to Emma: "Let's finish what we started." She replied with just 2 words: "Let's burn them." The morning after the article went live, I woke up to chaos. My phone was buzzing non-stop: messages, calls, notifications. The story had exploded overnight. It wasn't just trending anymore, it was everywhere. News outlets picked it up, influencers were talking about it, and people inside the company were leaking even more information. The silence they tried to force on me had turned into a roar. I turned on the TV. The headline across the bottom of the screen made my heart skip a beat: "Corporate fraud scandal rocks major firm, internal whistleblower exposes leadership." I felt a strange mix of fear and satisfaction. They didn't say my name, but I knew the people in that office did. I could imagine the panic, the frantic meetings, the whispered questions about who had done it. Within days, the company announced an internal investigation. The regional director resigned first, claiming health reasons. Then another executive stepped down. Emails leaked showing how the leadership had tried to suppress internal audits, how they'd buried reports and intimidated employees into silence. Everything I'd risked to expose was now out in the open. But victory came with a price. The company's lawyers came after me quietly. I started getting legal notices, accusations of defamation, breaches of contract, violations of confidentiality. They wanted to scare me back into the shadows. For a moment, I almost broke. The stress was crushing, and every time the phone rang, my chest tightened. But I wasn't alone anymore. Emma's article had inspired others. Former employees started reaching out, sharing their own stories of harassment, corruption, and retaliation. Some were afraid to go public, but their words gave me strength. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for everyone they'd hurt and silenced before me. A few weeks later, the government stepped in. A formal investigation was launched. The same executives who'd smiled while signing fraudulent checks were suddenly facing subpoenas. Watching them get questioned on live TV felt surreal. I had imagined that moment 1,000 times, but the reality was quieter, more sobering. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. I lost my job, of course. They called it mutual separation, but it was just another lie. Still, I walked out of that building for the last time with my head high. No security escort. No tears. Just peace. Because I knew I had taken back something they could never steal again. My voice. Months passed. I found a new job at a smaller company. Nothing flashy, but honest work. The people there actually listened. They treated me like I mattered. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting the ghosts of the past to follow me. But they didn't. I was finally free. Emma's story went on to win an award for investigative journalism. She tried to thank me publicly, but I declined. I didn't want fame. I just wanted to move on. Still, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I sometimes reread that headline, the one that changed everything. And I smile. Because even though it cost me almost everything, I did what was right. The company never fully recovered. Their stock plummeted, their reputation shattered. The new leadership promised transparency and reform. Maybe they meant it. Maybe they didn't. But that's not my fight anymore. People often ask me if I'd do it again, if it was worth it. The sleepless nights, the fear, the loneliness. And I always tell them the same thing. Yes. Because truth has a strange kind of power. Once you speak it out loud, it doesn't belong to you anymore, it belongs to everyone it touches. Sometimes, when I walk past a tall office building, glass walls gleaming in the sun, I think about all the people still trapped inside places like that. I hope they remember my story. I hope they know that silence might protect them for a while, but courage lasts forever. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And from that darkness, I grew into something stronger than they could ever destroy.